best to ever do it. And the reason why he was the very first employee hired at ESPN Radio.
The first.
He was hired before Tony Bruno, before Keith Olbermann. The first man that they said, we've got to get him here to build this thing. The most prepared man in the history of sports. The great Chuck Wilson, coming from his gilded mansion right off the Newport coast as he's ready to sail out on his yacht off of Providence, Rhode Island. How are you, Chuck Wilson?
It's good to connect with you. And it is a strange time we're living in, isn't it?
Absolutely, but that doesn't, Rhode Island is beautiful. You've been up there, right? In New
England.
Yeah,
my sister lives up near.
Oh, your sister? I thought she lived in Florida.
Well, she lives in Connecticut, but near Mystic and all that area, so it's very close to Rhode Island.
Yeah, it's close, but it's still not Rhode Island.
No,
area. Come on, that's Chuck Wilson built that state. He still rules it right now. Chuck, great to talk to you, man. A lot of stuff to talk about, of course. I'm not going to talk about science here. The thing about the Eagles, and by the way, the mayor today has clarified his edict about shutting down everything in Philadelphia till March 1st of 2021, Chuck. Now, I know you're not a scientist. I'm not a scientist. But I haven't seen any doctors, epidemiologists, or anybody say that we will not be safe to go back outside with crowds of more than 50 people until March 1st of 2021. And if you've heard that, please let me know. And who was that person who came up with that?
Yeah, I don't know why we're trying to look that far into the future. I don't think anybody really knows that far in the future what's going to be happening. So why is the mayor doing this? What's the advantage?
I have no idea. I just look for simple. I'm a simple guy, Chuck. I look for simple solutions.
You run the city, for crying out loud.
No, trust me. If I was running this city, they wouldn't be in the shape. But I'm not I don't want to be a politician. A lot of people get on radio shows, and their whole goal is, I'm going to parlay this into a political career. I have no desire to do that, so I don't want to replace the mayor. I would never even put myself in that position. The problem with running for politics, Chuck, is that you always, once you get in, if you do, you owe too many people. And so when you owe people because of favors to get in, then you really can't have a clear vision of what you really want to do, what's best for the people. But enough about that. So that's the thing that bugs people here. And now one of the original thoughts was, and the mayor flat out said, no large, because the Eagles, the stadium, city runs it. So the city determines what the capacities are for engagement. So 50 people is the limit. And Chuck, the Patriots, all the NFL teams so far, of course, predicated on there being a season, have come up with some plans on what number of people will safely be allowed to come into the buildings. So you would think the Philadelphia Eagles, who are a pretty good team, would also have those plans in place. But the mayor now has passed the buck, saying that, we want to clarify this. The Eagles they're the ones who are going to tell their fans and their season ticket holders what they're going to do. So after telling everybody the Eagles couldn't play football, and it's a national headline, now all of a sudden he's passing the buck, saying that it's up to the Eagles to determine what they're going to do.
I just have no idea what the advantages of coming out so far in advance to try to say, what will be safe at that time, what won't be safe. The only thing we know right now is that wearing masks and social distancing does make a difference.
Yep.
And in areas that are really being hit hard by the virus, it makes sense to try to clamp down a little bit. The extent to which everybody can have arguments over, but there are also some areas of the country that are very low risk right now. And in those areas, we're going to be able to ramp up and do some things that we want to do more quickly. And we ought to just be guided by the science here. And the whole thing that this has become so politicized is ridiculous. It's a medical issue. This isn't about politics.
You know what it is, though, Chuck? Well, first and foremost,
it's an outrage.
Exactly. Harry?
Well, where do you stand on this, Chuck? Are you one of these guys that's more optimistic when it comes to sports coming back in full, or you one that, like us, like we vacillate? It's sort of almost day to day, where sometimes I'll come in here and I'm pumped up. I can't wait. I'm counting down. I got a countdown clock on my phone for the NBA, and I'm looking forward to everything starting. And then the next day I'll hear something else on TV or radio that puts me in a depression, saying that, and nothing's ever going to come back. They're going to cancel
we're all
football
doing.
and everything.
You're right. I think we're all going
it's
in that
unbelievable.
roller coaster.
Yeah. We are. Look, this is really difficult because it's been different in different parts of the country, and unfortunately, in areas that haven't really made it a priority and had people that were willing to go along with wearing masks and social distancing, we've seen these flare-ups. The thing I think that concerns me a little bit is, early on, guys, we got this impression that this was only going to impact old people, and that if we could find ways to protect old people, and so, well, we're not positive that that's the case. We've got some younger people that are also having some really tough medical issues, and you just want to be able to keep it under control. There's no way to completely stop it, but we can bring it under control. My feeling on sports has been, in the areas that have been hardest hit, I just don't see where the close contact sports, football, rugby, lacrosse, so I just don't see in those hard hit areas how you can return to playing those sports in the real near future until you could get some control on the effect of the virus in that area. The SEC, for instance, I just don't see how, each time they try to bring teams together, you saw what happened with North Carolina. You end up with half the team or more picking up the virus. And, so it's a really difficult situation. I think that over time we may be able to socially distance, wear masks, go to these stadiums in smaller numbers. Outdoors obviously appears to be a whole lot safer than indoors. The ventilation system indoors are going to have to be changed and stuff, but it's just going to have to be done in smart ways, and it can't just be guided by what our desire is. We all want to get back to playing, but we have to do it in a way that's safe and sustainable.
The great Chuck Wilson up in Providence in an undisclosed location. But it's a small state, so we could probably try to figure out where he is. No, we're not going to give out your address, Chuck, but you have been the king of Rhode Island, obviously in Providence radio for all those years, but you're not doing radio anymore, right? I know you're doing a lot of charity stuff, and you got your own organization called evenfield.org, because Chuck's always been about sportsmanship. One of the things we always used to do at ESPN, whenever there was some sort of an incident with athletes fighting or NBA brawls and things of that nature, hockey brawls, Chuck would always say, "Where's the sportsmanship?" And that became an ongoing theme, right, Chuck? And we do it to this day. Where's the sportsmanship?
Yes.
So he likes the Lady Bing trophy in hockey,
he is.
right?
Chuck will get the Lady Bing of sports broadcasting every single year.
Oh, yeah. And I listen, I get kidded for it. It's fine. I just believe in it. Look, we've got to return to have more trust and competitive integrity. I just think it's important. The way you win matters. We've trademarked that. The way you win matters, because the way you do everything in life matters. The way you treat other people, the way you achieve goals, and so on. And I want to get back to a time where it's, kids don't think just about what they can and can't do, but what they ought to do. And it's not going to be what I think they ought to do or what you think they ought to do, but what they think they ought to do. But it ought to be through the filter of, doing what's really best and what's truthful and so on. So the organization Evenfield, we're trying to promote integrity, life skills, and leadership through sports.
No, and it's brilliant, and that's what you've been committing your life to because it's been a while now, right? How many years since you've been on radio, Chuck?
Wow, started in the late 70s.
But I mean, since you've been off now, because we all moved off. Since your
2013.
Yeah, so it's
2013.
been 7 years since you've done a because we had Peter Brown on the other day, another one of our buddies from ESPN radio days, and he said he hasn't worked for a couple of years now, and he's sitting in Chicago with a young family, and he's just like, you know what? I don't. Nobody wants to hire me, and I don't know if I even want to do it anymore if I have to move around, especially during these times.
Yeah. Well, look, it's difficult. It's just, how important this whole area has been to me. And I just want to see youth sports become much more developmental and get away from just everything being about winning at really early ages. There's plenty of time to put the focus on the wins and losses. I want to see kids have opportunities to develop. Tony, Harry, we're losing so many kids by the age of 13 or 14. 3 out of every 4 kids are leaving sports. And, we don't need to lose all these kids, but adults are making these decisions that, well, this kid can play and this kid can't play. And you're making these decisions about kids who haven't even reached puberty yet. And so all of those late developing players are behind the 8 ball. A lot of them leave sports. Then they're walking down the hall in high school. They're 6'5", and the basketball coach is going, wow. And the kids say, "Nah, I gave up on basketball. I used to be small, and they didn't want to play me, and so on." To me, it ought to be much more about development, about learning sports, learning to play the right way, learning how to be a good teammate, and all the things that are the psychological part of it, the mental part of sports that eventually is going to make a huge difference, even with the elite players, Tony, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, the further up you go in ability, the narrower are the physical differences. What are the big difference makers at that point is the character and then the habits that you formed that make you somebody that makes other people better on a team.
The great Chuck Wilson talking sports and talking sportsmanship, and his organization again is evenfield.org. All right, Chuck, now we got the bubble down there. Your thoughts on the NBA and the snitch line. Apparently that snitch line's been ringing off the hook as people are calling out other players who are violating the quarantine areas and going outside. How many of these things are we going to see in the next couple of weeks down there in Orlando, Chuck?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple. We've already seen this in all places across the country. If you try to cheat the virus, you're going to lose, okay? That's just the way that works. If you try to cheat it, you try not to respect it, then you're bringing it back inside. You bring it back inside, and we're not going to have the NBA. So the only real blowback I see for the NBA, even if they make this work, is this whole issue about testing and the fact that, the league can get immediate testing and so on. And an awful lot of people who want it around the country can't. Yep. And I do think there's a hit to the NBA that way. But the bubble concept, I suppose, can work in maybe a short run for a while. But I don't know if you're going to keep young guys penned up in the bubble. What do you think's going to happen?
Well, we were in a bubble in our little studio up in Bristol, Connecticut. That was really being in a bubble. The room was smaller than the studio down here. We were in there for 7 hours a night.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's so funny too, right? We're working at a quote unquote network, and we're in like a 7-by-7 room with no windows
and no doors.
Outside.
It sounded like a broom closet.
It was. I mean, the ESPN radio just launched, and they finally built studios. But in the beginning, it was literally like a box that you would see, like a storage unit. But I mean, it had chairs and tables in it. But technically, it was a box.
So that outdoor shot that they'll show if you're watching like Sports Center or Get Up or whatever of the campus, like none of that was there back then, right?
Well, the first big part was, but the studios were on the fourth floor where all the TV people worked in cubicles. But we were in a corner in a little box, and then it took a while before they started building studios because that was the beginning of ESPN Radio in 1992.
Now, Chuck, this is Miss Robin. I have one little thing to add there of this fictitious bubble that Tony's talking about back in the good old days, because we've heard stories about the Bruno Bash in the hotel room afterwards.
That was a bubble. That was guys after sitting in a hotel room with a bathtub full of beer and kibitzing after the show. Because 7 hours of talking
Didn't
sports.
You talk enough?
No, but we didn't talk about the show and what segment was good. That was in the meeting after our 7-hour show with our bosses, right, Chuck? We'd have a meeting after 7 hours to run down which segments were good and which segments didn't work.
Wow.
Exactly. And the funniest thing was some of the regulars we had have on, they would say, this person, they were just being themselves. That's and Tony would be on the floor trying to sleep. He'd have a couple of Jolt Colas after that. And I don't know how you did it on that Sunday night of then getting out of your fetal position on the floor, driving all the way to Philadelphia doing morning drive. My hat's always been off to you. I can't believe you did that.
I can't either, Chuck, and neither can my family because I had a young family then, and I was going back and forth, going on that. And that drive is a tedious drive because, 84 through Connecticut, drive. Over the George Washington Bridge, and then on the New Jersey Turnpike in winter when, it's just a monotonous drive. Yeah. And you're that's why I would drink 3 Jolt Colas just to stay awake and get back to the studio in Center City, Philly, and then do another show at 5:30 a.m. to 10, and then go home and sleep from noon until noon the next day.
With Angelo, another Rhode Island guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The funny thing about it is that the meetings afterward were just a typical thing of what happens at a network, right? Because, you have to have a post-meeting. You just got off the air doing 7 hours. There really isn't a whole lot to say, but you've got to be able to say that you had a post-production meeting so that you could discuss everybody's exhausted. Poor Tony's got to get up and travel to Philadelphia. Eventually, they did away with them, and we ended up with really nice studios eventually. But the funny thing was just how early on those studios were just so small. In fact, so small that with 3 hosts in there, a host had to get up each time an update guy had to come in and do an update.
Exactly, yes.
That's
Really?
kind of like down here. In
There are
the
only 3
wine
chairs, and the middle chair was the host, the third host.
Oh, so he had to
would
give
get
up his chair.
And then of course,
Yes.
the great update guys, whether it was Dan Davis, the legendary Dan Davis.
Kestecher, was he back
No,
there?
that was Mark. Well, this is before. This is way before Mark Kestecher. Who else do we have in there? We had Bob Picozzi.
Bob Picozzi. Okay.
Bob Picozzi was terrific.
Absolutely. Now we had so many great people, Chuck, and it was a lot of fun. And to this day, a lot of people say, that ESPN Radio weekend show, Tony Bruno, it was Chuck Wilson, Keith Olbermann, and Tony Bruno. People grew up because we were on everywhere. And back then, there weren't a lot of networks available. People would listen to that show knowing they'd get the updates and the interviews from the locker rooms and that stuff. We took no phone calls from listeners.
No phone calls.
No
7
phone
hours,
calls.
no phone calls.
And just going live to a game, screaming, it's a final when a game was over, then going afterwards and get great interviews. So it was a lot of fun. And I'm glad I was a part of it.
The hard thing, though, was Tony Bruno every single week was talking about how great Troy Aikman is, that he's probably the greatest quarterback in the history of the game. Every week.
But you know what's interesting about that, Chuck? Every time I met Troy Aikman after that or talked to him, he would always say, I loved you on the radio. You're my favorite sports talk radio host. Because he knew it wasn't hatred of human beings.
Right.
It was just sports.
Right.
It's like Yankee fans and Red Sox fans.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And we would just have fun. And so I did that stuff. And, the Syracuse fans didn't like me because I said they would never make it to the national championship game that year. And then they went on and won the national championship. And I got hammered for that. But I wasn't trying to get people irritated. I was just trying to get people to pay attention. That's what it's all about, Harry.
You probably gave them motivation to win.
I
Tony.
did. I think Jim Boeheim and those guys should have sent me a national championship ring.
Yeah,
exactly.
I never had more fun in radio in 30 some odd years than working with Tony Bruno as his wingman, because the idea of doing 7 hours is pretty unbelievable. But if Tony's sitting next to you, you're going to have fun, and we did.
Harry, I don't know. Harry can't tolerate 3 hours a day with me.
No. But Tony said before we brought you on, Chuck, that you were the most prepared man in sports radio history. And he said that you would bring in reams of paper with all kinds of notes, and you'd cut out the columns and the stuff out of the newspapers and all that stuff. What did Tony bring to the table as far as prep?
Tony Bruno brought his intellect, his wit, his humor.
Because now he takes copious notes. He's got a legal pad over here with it's filled to top to bottom
Every day. I still take this seriously. I could just mail it and say, I've been doing this for 50 years. What do I need to prepare? You have to prepare. But Chuck is the most. And remember, back then, Chuck, Chuck would go to the newsstand and buy like the Boston Globe, the New York Times, and cut out columnists, and that's where we would see what people were talking about around the country. We were in Connecticut.
Right.
We had to talk about the whole country, not just local Connecticut news.
Because this was like pre-personal computer days, pre-internet, pre-all that.
Exactly. So, again, we weren't revolutionaries. We were just guys, and Chuck always did this, and to this day, he's the most prepared guy. But you did get accused of not just destroying trees, Chuck, but forests. Do you feel bad for the deforestation that you caused in your years at ESPN Radio?
I do, my friend. I plead guilty. Trying to make amends.
All right, Chuck, last thing, and that, of course, is we talked about the NBA, but the NFL, because there's a lot of talk about, they can't do it. I saw the talk about putting actually shield in the helmets
from Oakley,
the Oakley shield that would keep players from spitting on each other accidentally or on purpose, because they're going to be tackling. You're going to tackle guys, and there's going to be contact. And even if you have that, if you have the shield, and then when you're on the sidelines, you don't have to worry about he's fewer than 6 feet away. So I understand football is going to be tough to do, but I think there's enough stuff, gloves, cleaning the ball, cleaning everything else, having the guys clean their hands every time they go off the field. I think football is taking a lot of bad hits as people are saying it's not possible to play. We're seeing rugby, Australian rules football being played in other countries. You can't get any more physical and close than those sports.
But the key is getting the virus under control. You know, these other countries that have gone to return school and everything else have gotten the virus under control. If we get the virus under control so it's not just a raging epidemic, I think we're going to be able to do a lot of things to return. But we've got to get the thing under control. I think the NFL for this year, it's going to be really, really difficult. I think the Shield idea would help a lot, but I think it's really tough right now for the fall.
So do you think there will be NFL football? We know college is already making decisions to shut it down. The NFL hasn't. We're seeing a lot of conferences. Do you think there will be an NFL season, Chuck? I have to put you on the hot seat.
I think the money is so immense that they're going to find a way to play. So, yes, I think they'll play.
And we know you're a big baseball fan, Chuck. Do you like the 60-game thing, and do you think that'll work?
Baseball blew it because they should have come back much earlier than they did. If they'd come back, and they would have owned July 4th, they would have owned early on. I think they made and they turned off a lot of fans. Fans always come back, but baseball, it's more problematic, I think, for the popularity of it long term.
I agree. We all agree. We remember the 94 season when the strike happened, and we had John Sterling on a couple of weeks ago when we brought him into the studio during that strike year, remember? And John Sterling came up and sat in with us on ESPN radio because there was no baseball to do. So we're not going to have that, at least. We're not going to have a shutdown. Who knows about next year and the year after that, but we'll see what happens. Hopefully it happens, and if it doesn't, we're not going to sit here and say they should, coulda, shoulda, woulda. We know that they have to be safe. That's all that matters. Everyone can agree with that. Nobody's saying they should be forcibly sent back. So we all agree that you have to be safe, and we have to get the virus. That's why we're safe down here, Chuck. We're not wearing masks. Well, Harry wears one every once in a while.
No.
But we have our temperature meters here, Harry.
Yeah.
Chuck, see, we got one of these. We always take our temperature. Let me check myself right now. 98.4, Chuck, so I am safe to continue broadcast activity.
Yeah, but it's more about your blood pressure.
I have one of those.
He's got one of those, too.
Wait.
He's got the pulse ox thing.
I got the pulse ox, too. Chuck, this is science.
There you go.
This show's based on science, not just hyperbole. So let me put this on and see where I am right now. Let's see what my oxygen intake is.
We should bring the cuff downstairs, though, so you can take
Blood
your actual
pressure
blood
cuff?
pressure cuff.
Now,
Yeah,
this
but
is
yesterday he had a rant, and he put that on, and he
Yes.
was at like 74.
Yeah.
So now I'm 98% oxygenated.
Right.
And my pulse rate is 80.
80. That's not bad.
No.
That's not bad, right, Chuck? You give
Nope,
me
not
permission,
bad at
Chuck
all.
Wilson, to continue and finish today's program on this Wednesday. Am I mentally or physically and, more importantly, aerobically and mentally capable of continuing this show today, huh? And Chuck Wilson, I will ask you that.
Mentally?
Yes.
I see that. That was so hard.
All right, this thing doesn't gauge mental acuity.
Why do you have
No,
to do that?
this doesn't
Just leave
make.
it physically. We would have been okay.
Well, no, I'm talking about all the vitals. My vitals are good. That's all that matters.
Yes.
If you can breathe and talk, you can do this, ladies and gentlemen. That's what they say at Harry's Broadcasting
That's
School.
right. Connecticut School of Broadcasting.
Harry said, if you can breathe, you can talk, and you can write a check, you too can enter the wonderful world of broadcasting. Chuck, great to talk to you, my friend. We got
You be well, Tony. Take care, Harry. And Miss Robin, remember, she's the brains of the outfit, Tony. Never forget that.
Absolutely. She reminds me of it every single day, Chuck. Thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Chuck.
Let's give Chuck Wilson, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Chuck, what's your website?
Evenfield.org.
Evenfield.org. Are you on Twitter if you eschewed social media?
Yep. You just Chuck Wilson and underscore with EF.
And just really quick, this is for children ages, or is this for anybody?
Well, it's for anybody. I mean, because we're working a lot with coaches and with adults on the best way for them to help their kids get the most out of the youth sports experience. But overall, we're trying to work with the adults who are involved with kids U13.
Now, is Chuck following you on Twitter?
I don't know. I got
Yes,
to
he
check.
is.
He is?
Of course I am.
Of
Come
course.
on, Harry.
I'm just
I don't
asking.
have to. I don't have to
Come
ask
on,
Chuck
Harry.
Wilson to follow me. We go back. We go back 28 years. Come on, Harry.
What's
the matter with you, man?
It's
Let me
an
give you one.
outrage.
It is an outrage.
Wait a
Even
minute, that's
President
your
Obama said it.
It's an outrage.
Chuck,
He asked everybody that we bring on this show if he's following him
that's
on
important.
Twitter.
That's an important thing. The
Well, I
social
wanted
media.